The woman next door was stunning, elegant, alluring, the kind who turned heads effortlessly. Every man in the school apartment was captivated by her. Every man except my husband, who scoffed at the mere mention of her. But when the elevator plummeted, he forgot all about me and our daughter. He turned, arms locking around her in a desperate embrace, so tight as if he wanted to pull her into his very bones. Mark Harris and I were both professors at the same university. He taught history and I taught philosophy. Mark was refined and composed, meticulous in both his work and daily life. He had a precise, almost surgical way of doing things, and his habits were as neat and orderly as his lecture notes. He was also an exceptional homemaker. I, on the other hand, had a gentler presence. My looks were delicate, my demeanor warm. I preferred simplicity, clean, understated outfits, a quiet life filled with books, cats, and potted plants. Our shared academic background and similar lifestyles fostered an unspoken harmony between us. Mornings were spent over simple breakfasts. Evenings, Mark prepared dinner while I reviewed notes for the next day's classes. And every night before bed he softly whispers that he loves me. Occasionally we'd sit together discussing philosophical dilemmas from books or exchanging views on historical events. It was a quiet, seamless rhythm, one that seemed unbreakable. Our neighbors were friendly, the building a place of easy camaraderie. Mark was well-liked, patient and courteous with everyone. Everyone except for one person, our neighbor across the hall, Linda Hopkins. Objectively speaking, Linda was stunning. She had striking features, a figure that curved in all the right places. Her hair was always in perfect curls, lips always painted a bold red. Every outfit she wore clung to her frame, accentuating the effortless sensuality in her every move. The elevator or hallway always carried the lingering trace of her perfume long after she'd passed. And each time our daughter Annie would pipe up in her tiny voice, "I smell Mrs. Hopkins. She smells so nice, I like it." Mark, however, would wrinkle his nose and let out a quiet, disapproving huff, as though the air itself had been tainted by chemicals. Our building had a fair number of single men, and Linda was naturally sociable. Even from inside our apartment, we could often hear her chatting and laughing as she stepped off the elevator with one of them. One evening, as we returned from a walk, we found Linda standing by the elevator, deep in conversation with Mr. Brown from the 6th floor. We exchanged brief pleasantries before waiting for the elevator together. Mark stood apart, his expression subtly impatient. Linda flicked her hair back, her voice dropping to a murmur as she said to Mr. Brown, "I switched shampoos recently. I don't think I like the scent." Mr. Brown chuckled. "Really? I think it smells just fine." Linda laughed, then glanced, ever so casually, toward where Mark stood. He remained stiff-backed against the wall, his face unreadable. When the elevator doors opened, Linda stepped in first. Just as she exited on her floor, her high heel twisted beneath her. She lost her balance and pitched forward, straight into Mark. Her face landed squarely against his chest, leaving 2 vivid red lipstick stains on his crisp white shirt. "Oh, sorry, Mr. Harris," she said, feigning light-heartedness. "Had a little too much to drink earlier. Guess I got a bit dizzy." Mark pressed his lips together, silent, his expression rigid with displeasure. Linda hesitated, looking momentarily flustered. She was clearly unused to being ignored by men. I smiled, breaking the tension. "Will you be all right on your own?" Linda tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, sighing dramatically. "Not much choice," she said with a wry smile. "My husband's always traveling for work, never around when I need him. I envy you two always together. If only my husband were as thoughtful as Mr. Harris." When we got home, Mark did something unusual. Instead of settling down with a book like he always did, he went straight to take a shower. I lost myself in reading for a while, only snapping out of it when I noticed him stepping out of the bathroom, his hair still damp. I blinked, a little surprised. "You were in there a long time." He towel-dried his hair, his voice cool and indifferent. "Didn't like the smell on me." That Saturday night, Mark and I were reading together in the living room, a quiet weekend ritual we had grown accustomed to. I absently stroked the cat curled in my lap and after a moment asked, "Why are you so hard on Linda?" He was silent for 2 seconds, then let out a quiet scoff, a trace of derision flickering across his face. "Adrian works tirelessly overseas to provide for her. Yet Linda behaves as if his dignity means nothing. I'm not saying women are always the root of trouble, but history has proven time and again that some certainly are. I couldn't help but smile at that. Adrian had been Mark's college roommate. In fact, we had chosen this apartment building specifically because of their friendship. A year ago, Adrian had married Linda and moved her in, but not long after he was assigned a 2-year work placement in Dubai, leaving his wife behind to manage on her own. I thought Mark's words were a bit harsh, but I knew how stubborn he could be. Since that lipstick-stained incident, Linda had become noticeably reserved around him. Gone was the usual playful warmth she showed to others. In front of Mark, she lowered her gaze, her manner polite, almost subdued, as if harboring some unspoken grievance. Mark, for his part, barely tolerated her presence. His distaste was unmistakable. On my birthday, our little family of 3 was heading out to dinner when Linda happened to step out of her apartment at the same time. She greeted me first, cheerful as ever, then bent down to affectionately pat Annie's head. But when her gaze landed on Mark, her smile faded into something distant and formal. "Mr. Harris," she said with crisp politeness, maintaining a strict boundary between them. Mark gave a curt nod, his eyes fixed on the elevator screen, his expression unreadable. Inside the elevator, Linda positioned herself in the far right corner. Mark stood in the center. Annie and I were on the opposite side. Just as the doors shut and the descent began, the elevator gave a violent shudder. Then suddenly, it dropped. A sharp, stomach-lurching free fall. I had no time to scream. The crushing weightlessness seized me, instinct taking over as I wrapped my arms tightly around Annie, holding her close. The plunge was abrupt, terrifying. But then just as suddenly it stopped. The emergency brakes kicked in just before the ground floor. The cabin jerked to a halt, sending a shudder through my bones. Heart hammering, I turned my head and froze. Mark was holding Linda. Oh, he was clutching her. Their faces were pressed together, bodies locked so tightly it was as if he was trying to pull her into himself. "Daddy, don't be scared. It's okay now." Annie's small, reassuring voice broke the heavy silence. The two of them, Mark and Linda, lifted their heads. Mark's eyes met mine. A flicker of something flashed through them. Shock, guilt, something unspoken, before he abruptly let go. "Oh, I thought you were standing over here." His mouth pressed into a thin line, his tone tinged with frustration as if disappointed in himself. "Daddy, you're so silly. Mommy and I were over here the whole time." Annie giggled, oblivious. Beside him, Linda stood frozen, her chest rising and falling. There was shock in her expression. Shock and something else. A thrill, barely concealed. On the way to the restaurant, Mark drove in silence while Annie and I sat in the back seat. No one spoke for a long time. The quiet stretched between us, thick and unyielding. Mark kept his eyes on the road, then finally in a low voice he said, "Amelia, sweetheart, it all happened so fast." I panicked. "I didn't realize, I didn't mean to. Please don't be upset." I finished tying the last loop of Annie's hair ribbon, pulling it snug. Then I lifted my head and looked at him. "Sweetheart, what were you just saying?" Mark hesitated. Then quickly recovering, he glanced at us through the rearview mirror. "What are you two up to back there?" "Mommy's braiding my hair," Annie announced proudly. I patted her round little cheeks, smiling. Her braid got messed up when I was holding her earlier, so I fixed it. Mark's eyes flickered again in the mirror. His voice carried the slightest hesitation. "You were fixing Annie's hair this whole time?" "I thought you." I turned to the window, watching the neon lights blur past. They were dazzling. Almost surreal. "I'm starving," I murmured. "I heard that restaurant's really popular. Hope we don't have to wait for a table." 2 nights later, Linda showed up at our door carrying a basket brimming with fresh fruit. She wore a white low-cut dress, her makeup flawlessly done, her hair still damp in places, clinging softly to her collarbone. "Amelia, I picked up some fresh strawberries today and thought you might enjoy them." I smiled as I took one, biting into it with genuine interest. "Sweet, just as I expected. Thank you." Then without much thought I handed the bag to Mark. He took it without hesitation, as naturally as if we had rehearsed it 100 times before. Walking into the kitchen, he neatly transferred the fruit into fresh storage bags, sorting them meticulously before placing them in the fridge. Linda blinked, visibly surprised. I never imagined Mr. Harris was so thorough with housework. I chuckled, reaching for a wet wipe to clean the sticky juice from my fingers. Mark really was exceptional at it. Efficient, precise, methodical. Just the way I liked. When he returned, he took a seat at the far end of the couch and pulled out his phone. The position placed him directly across from Linda's single-seater, their feet almost touching. Linda straightened subtly, a glimmer flickering in her eyes. I tilted my head and smiled at her. You came over for a reason, didn't you? Her lips curled as she laughed lightly. Yes, actually. Lately I've been really interested in history, but I don't have much background in it. Some parts are hard to grasp, and I was hoping Mr. Harris could help me out from time to time. As she spoke, she locked eyes with Mark, holding his gaze. Mark, still staring at his phone, didn't immediately respond. Linda bit her lip, waiting. Mark was undeniably brilliant, one of the best in his field. But he also had little patience for what he deemed mediocrity. After publishing 2 well-received historical works, he had been invited to a few business banquets where self-important socialites tried to engage him in shallow intellectual debates. He had come home irritated each time, vowing to avoid such situations in the future. Now, whenever someone approached him with the intention of learning, his first reaction was to declare that he suffered from an allergy to ignorance, making it clear he had no interest in entertaining idle curiosity. So I was more than a little curious about how he would respond. After a long pause, Mark finally lifted his gaze from his phone and regarded Linda with unreadable detachment. History is a vast and demanding discipline, he said flatly. It requires patience and persistence. Are you capable of that? Linda lifted her chin, her voice laced with an almost flirtatious confidence. Of course. I won't let you down. I leaned back into the couch, watching the exchange unfold. Linda's damp hair had darkened the fabric of her white dress, turning it semi-transparent. The soft curves beneath became subtly visible, though she seemed oblivious. Leaning in eagerly, she pressed closer, asking about recommended readings. Mark, without hesitation, listed a book. Linda dutifully lowered her head to jot it down. Another title, another note. My gaze drifted past them, settling on the potted plant in the middle of the balcony. I had taken such careful care of it. Yet somehow it was wilting. Abruptly, I stood up. The movement was sudden enough to halt their conversation. Both of them turned toward me in unison. I smiled, lifting the pair of scissors in my hand. Don't mind me, I said lightly. I just need to trim the plants. From that day on, Linda started coming over every few nights. She always had that just out of the shower look. Either her cheeks were flushed or her hair was damp, clinging to her shoulders in dark waves. And every time she stepped through the door, the scent of her perfume mixed with shampoo filled the air, saturating the space. She would curl up in the single-seater, book in hand, and bombard Mark with questions. What's the historical context of the American Civil War? What do you think of the history of 20th century wars? Mark answered her with ease, drawing from an endless well of references. His explanations were thorough, engaging, his tone almost eager, a subtle excitement glinting at the edges of his words. Because of Linda's visits, our nightly reading time got pushed back. Mark made sure to clarify. Adrian asked me to look after Linda while he's away. At least she's reading instead of going out drinking with friends. This is what Adrian wants too. I sat with the cat in my lap, stroking its fur, eyes downcast, saying nothing. After a pause, Mark added, How about this? When she comes over, I'll take her to the study so you and Annie can have the living room to yourselves. His study was sacred to him, lined with bookshelves, every desk and lamp meticulously arranged. He called it his tangible mental sanctuary. No one was allowed in. Not guests, not even Annie, who had been shooed out a few times when she'd wandered in to play. Except for me. I looked at him quietly. You've already made up your mind? He nodded, then smiled. Of course. But I wanted to check with you first. I ran my fingers through the cat's fur, letting the silence stretch between us before answering, my voice warm and even. I have no objections. Spring was mating season. At some point, our lazy cat started sneaking out onto the balcony and disappearing into the neighborhood. Mark and I had to search for it several times, combing the streets at night. That evening, I returned home after another search mission, stepping into the living room to find Annie sitting on the floor, playing with her toys. Mark had been here with her when I left. "Where's Daddy?" I asked. Annie looked up and said, "Mommy, Mrs. Hopkins came over." My eyes drifted to the study door. It was slightly ajar. Silence from within. Bending down, I set the cat on the floor. It sprang forward, darting straight for the study. The door swung open abruptly. A startled gasp. "Oh my God." Linda's voice. I stepped inside, feigning nonchalance. "This cat just keeps running off." Mark shot to his feet, his entire body tense. Linda sat on the couch, cheeks flushed, breathing uneven. I scooped up the cat, cradling it in my arms. As I turned to leave, my eyes landed on Mark. Softly I said, "Mark, what happened? Your lip is bleeding." He stiffened. Then, almost too quickly, wiped at his mouth with the back of his hand. It's nothing," he said hoarsely. "I must have bumped it by accident." On Saturday, Mark was in the kitchen cooking. He was an excellent cook. His bolognese pasta and red wine braised beef were among my favorites. Though he insisted on handling most of the housework, I occasionally did small things, like folding the laundry he had just washed and putting it away in the closet. I was doing exactly that when Professor Daniel called. At that moment, I was staring silently at a white dress shirt in my hands. On the chest, 2 distinct lipstick stains. Neatly folded. Tucked away deep inside the closet. "Amelia. Tomorrow is Clara's birthday. I've invited a few of our former students. Why don't you come too?" I placed the shirt back exactly as I had found it and smiled into the phone. "Of course, Professor. I'll be there." Professor Daniel and his wife Clara were both prominent figures in philosophy, and they had always treated me kindly. The gathering was small, intimate. The former students in attendance had all gone on to achieve great success. Wealthy, influential. I was the only one who had remained an ordinary university professor. During the party, Clara took my hand. Her voice tinged with nostalgia. "I always thought you had great ambitions, Amelia. Never imagined you'd be the first among us to settle down and have children. But I suppose in the end that's the path all women must walk." Then with a laugh she added, "You know, I was the one who introduced you to Mark." A familiar voice chimed in. "Wait, Clara, you played matchmaker?" I turned to see Jay, my former university classmate, handing me a glass of wine. He grinned as I accepted it. "If I had known you were in the matchmaking business, I would have begged you to set me up years ago." Clara shook her head. "Oh, I wasn't matchmaking at all. Back then, Amelia asked me how she could make a breakthrough in her philosophical research in the shortest time possible. I told her to collaborate with a historian. Then she asked if I had any recommendations and I mentioned Mark." Jay glanced at me and for a moment, the teasing in his expression faded into something quieter. When it was time to leave, Clara asked Jay to drive me home. Jay had been 3 years ahead of me at university. A philosophy major who had carved his own path in the business world. Now he was a rising star in tech worth billions. As we walked to his car, he said, "Amelia, I've privately funded a new social research project. No budget cap. Would you be interested in joining?" His head tilted slightly as he studied me, eyes gleaming with intent. I pressed my lips together. "Maybe another time." Jay exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking his head. The same answer you've given me every time for the past few years." He stuffed his hands in his pockets, nudging a small rock on the pavement with his shoe. For a second he looked just like the boy I used to know. "Amelia," he mused, voice light, "maybe I should have studied history instead. Don't you think?" I furrowed my brows slightly but said nothing. Jay's gaze deepened. He raised a hand as if to ruffle my hair like he used to back in school. But halfway through he hesitated, then let it drop. With a self-deprecating chuckle he muttered, "Forget it. I never could figure you out." Then, as if shaking off the moment, he curved his lips into a smile. "But I think I'll wait a few more years. Who knows? Maybe I'll still have a chance." When we arrived at my building, Jay got out to open the car door for me. I stepped out, offering a polite farewell. "Amelia." His voice stopped me. I turned. He watched me for a long beat, then sighed. "If you don't want to join the project, at least recommend someone. The competition for spots is intense, but I'll save you a place." I didn't respond to that, just smiled and waved. "Goodbye." As his car drove off, I heard my name again. "Amelia." I turned to see Mark striding toward me, his expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. Was that Jay Forbes from Golden Bridge Group? I nodded. He's one of Clara's former students. Mark's excitement was immediate. He just poured a massive investment into social science research projects. I actually just submitted an application for funding. You know him? I smiled faintly then shook my head. Not really. Clara just asked him to give me a ride home. That evening after a stroll with Annie I returned home, intending to tend to the plants on the balcony. But when I stepped outside I noticed something strange. One of the potted plants was missing. I searched the entire apartment then checked the hallway. That's when I heard Mark's voice coming from Linda's apartment. Since the night the cat had barged into the study, Linda had claimed she was terrified of cats and insisted it would be better for Mark to tutor her at her place instead. Amelia, I feel terrible always intruding on you and Annie. Since my place is empty most of the time, why not have Mr. Harris come over instead? She had laughed playfully, adding, of course if you don't trust the two of us I can always leave the door open. You're welcome to drop by any time. Now the door was indeed ajar. I walked over slowly. Their voices drifted through the opening. Mr. Harris, we've been spending quite a lot of time together lately. You don't think Amelia will mind, do you? Mark chuckled. She wouldn't dare. Why not? His answer was smooth, effortless. The same tone he used when analyzing historical events. Amelia isn't like you. She seems easygoing on the surface but at her core, she's a rationalist. Linda's voice carried a teasing lilt. What does that mean? Mr. Harris, I told you not to use those fancy academic words around me. I don't get them. Mark let out a quiet laugh, softening his tone. It means she's perceptive, calculating. She weighs every decision with logic. This household still revolves around me. I am the best option within her available choices, so as long as I decide something she won't oppose me. Tell me, has she ever once expressed discontent toward you? Now that you mention it, no. She hasn't. Linda sounded as if she had just stumbled upon some grand realization. When Mark returned home I was curled up on the couch, stroking the cat. He looked pleased, as though something had put him in a particularly good mood. Then, as if suddenly remembering, he chuckled and asked, by the way, why has the cat stopped running off lately? I continued running my fingers through its fur. It let out a soft, contented purr. Because I took him to the vet for neutering. I spoke gently, my voice smooth and steady. He won't be affected by those urges anymore. Linda's demeanor toward me had shifted into something indescribable. Before, she would greet me warmly, call my name with a bright smile, exuding effortless charm. Now she merely offered a faint, knowing smirk, saying nothing yet conveying everything. There was an arrogance in her gaze, a trace of mockery, even a glint of pity. Like a peacock, regal and self-assured, convinced of its own allure yet too proud to put it on full display. Mark went to her apartment every night, without fail, and each time he returned, there were tiny, almost imperceptible changes. A lingering trace of perfume on his skin. An extra button undone at his chest. A small, delicate bite mark on the back of his hand. Linda, ever the gracious hostess, would occasionally bring over fruit, all under the guise of gratitude. Mr. Harris refuses to take any tutoring fees, she would say with a sheepish smile. I feel terrible about it, so I can only bring small gifts as a token of appreciation. Each time Mark would sit there, composed and unreadable, lips curled just slightly at the corners, almost imperceptibly amused. One vibrant, the other reserved, restrained. And in the thick, sweltering air of midsummer nights, something unspoken pulsed between them. That evening Linda arrived with a watermelon in tow. I was on the balcony watering the plants while chatting with Clara on the phone. Annie, playing inside, suddenly shouted that she was thirsty. Mark obligingly cut open the watermelon and handed her a slice. When he turned to offer one to Linda, she didn't take it. Instead, she shot me a glance, loaded, deliberate, before tilting her head up at Mark, lips pouting ever so slightly. Oh, I don't like getting my hands sticky. I only drink watermelon juice. Mark chuckled, turning toward the kitchen. Linda, meanwhile, feigned sudden interest in my potted plants and stood, strolling toward the balcony. In doing so, she collided with Annie, who had been focused on eating her watermelon. The small girl lost her balance and instinctively reached out, grabbing hold of Linda's dress for support. Two tiny hands, still damp with juice, left bright red stains on the pristine white fabric. Linda recoiled instantly. "What is wrong with you?" she shrieked. She tore Annie's hands off her dress and shoved her away. Annie hit the ground hard. She burst into tears. The commotion brought Mark storming out of the kitchen, a freshly blended glass of watermelon juice still in his hand. Linda turned to him, her eyes rimmed with unshed tears, her voice trembling with feigned restraint. "Forget it. Annie didn't mean it. It's just, this dress was expensive. I got upset for a second, that's all." Mark set the juice down and pulled Annie to her feet, his face dark with disapproval. "Annie, apologize to Mrs. Hopkins." Annie's tear-streaked face lifted in shock. Her tiny chest heaved as she sobbed. "Daddy, I didn't do anything wrong. Mrs. Hopkins pushed me." Mark's expression darkened, his tone turning sharp. "Annie, when you make a mistake you take responsibility. I don't tolerate lying." I ended my call with Claire and set my phone aside. Annie, still sniffling, turned her wide, confused eyes between Mark and Linda, looking utterly lost. But when she spotted me she wasted no time. She ran straight into my arms, pressing her tear-streaked face into my shoulder. I wiped her tears, then slowly, methodically wiped her sticky little hands clean. Once she had calmed, I lifted my gaze to the two people standing before me. Mark stood rigid, his brow furrowed. "Amelia, you're too soft on her," he muttered. "It won't be good for her growth." Linda said nothing. She merely leaned against the couch, her eyes glinting with barely concealed amusement. A silent, smug challenge. I turned, walking to the table, picked up the glass of watermelon juice, and, in one smooth motion, I lifted it high and poured it over Linda's head. The deep red liquid streamed down, soaking into her perfectly styled hair, running over her forehead, dripping into her wide, shocked eyes, staining her pristine white dress in a violent clash of color. She froze. Then, a second later, "What are you doing?" A piercing shriek filled the room. Mark exploded. "Amelia, are you out of your mind?" I turned to him, and with every ounce of pent-up rage, betrayal, and suffocating humiliation I had endured, I slapped him across the face. Hard. The crack of impact rang through the room. Mark stumbled back, eyes blown wide, utterly speechless. He clutched his face, staring at me as if I had just shattered something fundamental within him. I met his gaze with ice-cold disdain. Then through clenched teeth I spat out two words. "You disgust me." Mark moved out first thing the next morning. He dragged his suitcase toward the door, his movements stiff with anger. I remained on the couch, unbothered. A lazy cat lay curled at my feet, purring softly, while I sipped my coffee at a slow, deliberate pace. His voice was ice-cold, laced with frustration and resolve. "I never imagined you'd be so emotionally unstable. Lashing out like that. Being so rude to a guest. And actually hitting me." His jaw clenched as he exhaled sharply. "If it weren't for my friendship with Adrian, Linda might have pressed charges against you." I took another sip, watching him without a word. "And don't you dare use Annie as an excuse. He's my daughter too. Do you think I don't care about her? Everything I've done has been for her benefit. Your way of raising her is going to ruin her." He gave me one last scathing look. I have nothing more to say to you. Take this time to think, really reflect on what you've done. When you finally realize your mistake, then maybe, I'll consider coming back." Then he slammed the door behind him. I set my cup down, picked up my phone and dialed a number. Mike, a private investigator I had hired a month ago. I hadn't wanted it to come to this. But Mark had crossed too many lines. And it was time I secured a way out for myself. The line clicked and Mike answered. "Mrs. Harris. I've reviewed the footage several times. At first she was the one making advances, but eventually he stopped resisting. There were multiple instances of physical contact. Though due to the camera angle we didn't capture any direct shots of kissing or embracing." I stroked the cat absent-mindedly. "So it's not solid evidence of an affair yet?" "Not exactly. If you can get me more footage, it's only a matter of time before we catch something more explicit." I exhaled softly, my fingers trailing down the cat's fur. It nuzzled into my palm, purring affectionately. They've changed locations. They don't use the study anymore. A brief silence. I can arrange for hidden cameras in their new spot, but be aware. If this goes to court, such footage may not be admissible. His voice lowered slightly. Another option is to check Mr. Harris's phone or computer. If we find messages, call logs, or even a photo of them together in a compromising position. I cut him off. Why go through all that trouble? A light chuckle escaped my lips. All we need to do is wait. I leaned back, idly stroking the cat. They'll slip up eventually. A beat of silence. Then, understood, Mrs. Harris. A week after Mark moved out, he still hadn't contacted me. He must have believed I couldn't live without him, that once my anger faded, I would obediently lower my head, admit my mistake, and beg him to come home. But he was wrong. That evening I met with Mike, my private investigator, and instructed him to keep tracking Mark. I need undeniable proof of his affair with Linda. I told him. Something they exposed themselves. Something that leaves no room for denial. Mike was silent for a moment, then nodded. Understood. I'll have my team follow up. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a message from Mike. I've got something for you. This time the evidence is solid. You're going to like this. There was a hint of excitement in his voice. I tapped the video file. The footage wobbled slightly before steadying. A hotel lobby came into view. Mark and Linda walked in side by side, their gazes flicking around the room, scanning for familiar faces. Linda clung to Mark's arm, leaning in as she whispered something, her lips curling into a playful smile. Mike's voice came through my earpiece, low and precise. Here you can see them entering the hotel. Watch. When they reach the end of the hallway, Mark pulls out a keycard and opens the door. On screen, Mark glanced over his shoulder. One last check for prying eyes, before swiftly unlocking the door. Linda wasted no time. She slipped inside, pressing eagerly past him. The next segment was taken from a balcony across from their room. The angle was slightly distant, but the details were still painfully clear. Inside, Linda shrugged off her coat, revealing a tight black dress that hugged every curve. She laughed, sultry and inviting, while Mark stood before her, reaching up to brush a strand of her hair back. He murmured something. She playfully pushed his chest, feigning protest. Then a moment later she looped her arms around his neck and leaned in. I kept my eyes locked on the screen, but inside I felt nothing. A quiet, hollow sort of emptiness. Their kiss started hesitant, teasing, before deepening into something more urgent. Mark's hands slid lower, pulling Linda closer. She melted into him, letting him guide her toward the sofa, her eyes gleaming with unfiltered desire. Then, as the intimacy between them escalated, I stopped the video. Mike cleared his throat. You can rest easy now. These images alone will be enough to ruin him. I exhaled slowly and closed my phone. My fingertips felt cold. It was undeniable. Concrete, irrefutable proof. And with it, the last shred of doubt I had been holding on to vanished. My marriage, my entire life with Mark, had been nothing more than a cruel joke. The first step was to destroy his reputation. Mark had built his career on the image of an academic paragon, rigorous, ethical, morally upright. And the thing he feared most was having that image tarnished. I anonymously leaked select footage from the surveillance video to a media outlet. At the same time, I sent the same evidence to a few of Mark's colleagues, including his former mentor. At first, the scandal spread in hushed whispers within academic circles. Have you heard? Professor Mark Harris. Apparently he was caught having an affair with someone else's wife at a hotel. Seriously? I thought he was all about integrity. Didn't he publish papers condemning moral corruption? There's video proof. Not just pictures. The rumors snowballed, gaining momentum until a well-known news site caught wind of the scandal and ran the story under the academic section. History professor Mark Harris caught in affair with friend's wife. Where is his academic integrity? The headline exploded across social media. Students shared it widely, mocking the hypocrisy of the man who once preached virtue and discipline. Soon, the university had no choice but to convene an emergency meeting to discuss disciplinary action. Inside the president's office, the air was thick with tension. Mark, the president said, his voice grave, are these allegations true? I Mark's face had gone deathly pale. His hands clenched involuntarily, a thin sheen of sweat forming at his temples. His mentor adjusted his glasses, his tone laced with quiet disappointment. "We've received numerous complaints," he said. "Not only from students but from their parents as well. They believe you are no longer fit to remain a professor at this institution. But this has nothing to do with my teaching ability." Mark shot up from his seat, his voice edged with desperation. "It has everything to do with your morality," the dean responded coldly. "A professor embroiled in public scandal taints the reputation of our university. You need to consider your future." Mark opened his mouth to argue, but then the president laid a folder in front of him. Inside were the high-definition photos of him and Linda at the hotel. His lips parted but no words came. His fingers trembled. His eyes for the first time reflected true panic. The silent judgment in the room pressed down on him like a weight he could no longer bear. "We need your resignation letter," the president stated firmly. Mark froze. "Or," the dean added, his voice impassive, "we will be forced to terminate your employment." Silence suffocated the room. Mark's fingers twitched against the surface of the desk. Finally his shoulders slumped. His voice, barely above a whisper, wavered. "I need time to think." But deep down he already knew his career was over. His reputation shattered overnight. The second step was to sever his financial resources. Jay reached out to me as soon as he heard about my situation. "Amelia, if you're interested in joining my social research project, I'll provide you with top-tier resources." I smiled and nodded, signing my name onto our contract. At the same time I initiated legal action through my attorney. A court order froze portions of our joint assets and I formally filed for divorce, demanding the majority of our wealth for myself and Annie. Mark received the court documents the following week. Rage consumed him. He stormed to my door, pounding his fist against it. "Amelia, this is too much." I opened the door with a calm, unreadable expression. "Too much." My voice was eerily composed. "More than what you did to me and Annie?" His eyes burned with fury. "We're married. You can't be this heartless." I met his gaze, unwavering. "You were the one who was heartless first." His mouth opened as if to argue, but for the first time no words came out. Only anger. Only regret. Only the bitter realization that the life he once controlled was now slipping through his fingers. Adrian was back. The moment he learned of his wife's affair, his rage was uncontrollable. "You slept with my friend?" Linda's face turned ghostly pale. He scrambled to explain. "Adrian, it's not what you think," but he was done listening. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he threw a divorce agreement onto the table. "Sign it. Then get the hell out of my life." Linda sobbed. But when she went to Mark for comfort, she found him in ruins. His career in shambles, his finances frozen, his once pristine life in utter disarray. Mark reached for her, his voice thick with desperation. "Linda, we can get through this together." She let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You think I'd stick around for this? You don't even have a job anymore." Then, without hesitation, she turned on her heel and walked away. Mark grabbed for her wrist, but she yanked herself free without a second thought. And just like that, whatever was left of his world collapsed. It wasn't until then, when everything he had built had crumbled around him, that Mark finally called me. His voice was low, subdued. "Amelia, can we talk?" A slow smile tugged at my lips. "Now you want to talk?" Pause. Then, as if grasping for some way to mend what was irreparably broken, he tried again. "There's been a misunderstanding. I don't want Annie growing up in a broken home." I laughed softly, coldly. "Funny. You didn't seem to care about that when you were holding Linda so tightly in that elevator." "That was an accident," he snapped. I met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "No, Mark. That was instinct." His breath hitched, and for the first time I saw it in his eyes, the slow dawning realization that I was gone, that I would never come back, that he had lost me forever. In the end, Mark lost everything. His reputation, his career, his money, his friends. He tried to salvage what he could, reaching out to Linda, to Adrian, even attempting to regain his position at the university. But it was far too late. No one wanted anything to do with him. He moved into a rundown apartment, barely scraping by on small research projects to make ends meet. One afternoon as I was picking Annie up from school, he finally gathered the courage to stop me. "Amelia." His voice was low, carrying a quiet plea. I looked up. He had changed. The sharp, confident man I once knew was gone, replaced by someone gaunt and weary. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and regret. "I was wrong." I said nothing. "I know I made an unforgivable mistake." He continued slowly. "But, could you give me another chance?" I smiled faintly. "Mark, don't you see?" He froze. "Some mistakes can never be undone." Then without another word I took Annie's hand and walked away. And all Mark could do was stand there watching me disappear from his life. With time, life settled into something peaceful. I started anew, focusing on Annie and carving out a life on my own terms. On quiet nights I would sometimes reflect on my marriage, feeling a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, clarity. I once believed love was an unbreakable vow, built on trust and devotion. But time had shown me the truth. Love could be eroded by neglect, torn apart by desire. Yet Mark's betrayal hadn't broken me. It had freed me. Women should never anchor their entire world to a man. Once I had been his wife, his quiet supporter, the woman who stood in his shadow. Now, I was Annie's mother, the author of my own destiny. I chose to move forward. I threw myself into Jay's research project, poured my energy into work and kept growing. The future would be mine to build on my own terms. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Annie slipped her small fingers into mine and looked up at me. "Mommy, are we happy now?" I knelt down, wrapping my arms around her, my voice soft against her ear. "Yes, sweetheart. We are very happy." The golden sunset stretched before us, casting light on the path ahead. And for the first time in a long while, I felt I was freer than ever.